I serve on 4 UL standards, and this is my first NFPA standard. And it is a weird thing to have NFPA, which says the rules that get adopted into law, say, here's what you do when a building's already been built and you come back here. And you want to look at it because it's transitioning. It's going to rental property, it's going to a new owner, and they want to know. But that's been done by electrical inspectors since the early 1900s in some jurisdictions. It's still done in England to a certain extent. You check what's there. And then the question is, well, you have a standards of practice. What do things need to go to NFPA for? And so maybe we can have some dialogue about that, because, I look at it from an electrician. You say, hey, I see plumbing problems, call in Jack, he's a plumber. I see electrical problems, hey, call Dave. He can dig in a little more deeply than I can in the time that I've allotted that you're willing to pay for. And then I do. I have the opportunity and I have the licenses to do that. And it's just a different perspective I get. And I'll be showing that throughout this. I'm going to be jumping around back and forth through NFPA 73. I'm not going to go linearly because I'm trying to bring up some highlights. So first off, dialogue. You have objections to something I say, you want to know about something, whatever, go ahead and ask. Teach me, teach each other. Now, one of the reasons that I think NFPA 73 is worth some of your attention is NFPA generally says this was installed legally, it's grandfathered. And with few exceptions, very few exceptions, you can even replace it in kind and still be grandfathered if it was installed legally to begin with. And that's one of my areas of expertise. People say, was this ever legal? I say, what year was that house built? And I go through my code books going back to, not continuously to the beginning, but with just a few exceptions. But suppose something is existing and it looks like hell. Well, when shouldn't it be grandfathered? If NFPA, the people come up with the National Electrical Code, say, no, this shouldn't be grandfathered, that's a pretty strong suggestion that you should consider it. Not just, I don't know how this looks, but no, NFPA 73 says this is no good. That's what we're saying to the customer. The powers that be think it is no good, not just my opinion as a trained home inspector. And ASHI is involved in NFPA 73. It's the same deal with any NFPA standard. There are a bunch of stakeholders. And I think the newest one of their special experts, but they're utility people, there's a utility person, manufacturers people, inspectors. Now, again, you grandfather some things. At one point, 1 watt per square foot was the way you designed a building. That's what that book says. I trust that book. It was true at the time. Well, that's not what we do anymore. But you don't say, hey, you've got to have this rewired on that basis alone. You see something ancient and, to my mind, beautiful like this, and it is grandfathered. It's not as safe as a dead front equipment. If you reach in to replace a screw and you didn't bring your flashlight, but it's grandfathered. NFPA considers it acceptable with the caveat, you're taking chances, which is what we all do when we see something that isn't right up to Well, the 2023 electrical code, or the 2026 in just a little bit. I'll get to that. Now, right? That we say, no way. You would say no way. And it says no way because it is a clearly identified hazard. You say, get somebody in there. You want to move into this house. I would, I wouldn't use that tub, and I would get that replaced as soon as possible so that you have an accessible, safely installed equipment. Because that is not. All right, simple. If only because, hey, this box is half buried in the wall. Somebody thought that was okay. Yeah. All right.
Have electrical panels ever been allowed in bathrooms?
Yes. And we shot down a proposal a public input I threw in to say, after another 15 years, they have to be replaced because they were legal into, I think, the 1950s. I'd have to look at my proposal. Never allowed up there. Now, it's goofy because codes and standards, sorry. Codes and standards tell us what you must do or shall not do. Everything else, normally, you're allowed. Yeah. But here they take the trouble to say, thou shalt be permitted to, and that's kind of funny. And it usually isn't something that you guys and lady are gonna have the time to spend much time on. And well, yeah, this is relatively trivial, but when I see that there is a button I can't find there. No, I didn't mean to do that. Get back there. When I see that there is a combustible material that got inside, I say, somebody was a little sloppy. What does this mean? That's just a question. I'll say, take a razor knife and clean that up, fine. But what kind of goofy things might they have also done? Oh, they took down a light and they sprayed paint on it. You don't know, but when I see something like that, I say, question. But that's simple. That's almost innocuous. How big a hazard is that? You see this and you say, there's wood paneling. There's an opening to the wall. Tell me something. Are wall plates flat on the back normally? No. They're curved out. There's room between them and the wall. And that's room in which sparks heat can get around and into the wall. That's why the fire code wanted all electrical boxes to be tested. Okay, to be tested to make sure that they could contain the heat and also to be installed with no gap around them. And the electrical people said, that's not realistic. We installed these things. You don't get everything perfect. They said, okay, we'll allow an 1/8 of an inch around an electrical box. Now, and you see that, you say, whoever did that work didn't know. I don't know which work. Could have been an electrician, I think. It could have been the person putting on the paneling, but somebody was creating a hazard. An 1/8 of an inch. Yeah. So that one right there, I don't know. But again, that's between 16th and 8th, 3/16. I don't say, oh my God, what a horrible job. But that one I say, bad. Warn them, put that in your report and say in strong terms, but you're not going to see it with that plate on. So that's a reason that I like to pull at least some plates. I can't pull all of them. Well, that's not true. I had one customer said, check all our receptacles and switches, and because he was buying a house for his old parents to move into. And I did, and I found something very bad we'll get to later if I can. That has to do with fenestration and intersystem interfaces. Now, I can understand why you'd say, oh, I don't want to get into that. Now, you say this practice, say, look in the electrical panel, see what's going on there. That's, but all that other stuff, where do you start? What's the liability? You know, you have the Hippocrates oath, you know. First, you give information, but don't hurt things. Well,
one of the issues we run into is custom painting, where people have wallpapered or painted or co-painted over receptacles. And you can't take the receptacle off without box knifing it or tearing something, and that's worth a suit.
yeah, you agreed. It has to be knifed. And
That takes time.
it does take time, and you have very limited time. And I tell them, hey, this is something that could happen. When I go in there, when you refer somebody to me and I go in there, I say, look, if I drop a light to see what the condition of the wiring is, and heat rises, so that's where your worst deteriorating wiring is going to be. And it's also a place that flippers are least likely to rewire, but they're likely to put a new fixture on, which is not rated, which is rated for a 90° C wiring minimum, right? But when I drop it, I tell them, I'll drop this, but if the wiring is too dangerous for you to put back up, I will not put it back up. And I've had people say, then don't drop it. I'd rather not have the information. Absolutely, they're my customer. So it's real. And here, I didn't break that receptacle, but it probably didn't look broken before I took the cover off. Right? You've seen this sort of issue and thought about it. Now, if I replace it, can I put the cover back on? Depending on type of cover, I'd have to replace the gasket. Now, here's a tricky thing, more of the same. You see the tape, you see this is not safe. I opened it, and that told me how bad it was. Was it just tape because the screws were lost a month ago? No. And this is going explicitly into the standard in the 2026 edition, that it says if equipment is hazardous because it's been abused, because it's deteriorated, because it was improperly installed, about 3 other reasons. And one of the things that's not in that point, but later on we say, under section for service equipment, but I think we're going to move it up in our August meeting, is if foreign materials gotten in. And that's big, you know, this is not just a matter of, hey, replace those screws, maybe the gasket, and you're good, replace the cover. You know, that's bad news. It's very lucky if it is not further deterioration there.
Because the only place it says foreign materials is in service panels.
It doesn't say that. It has been proposed in this for the next edition, but the car laying committee, the AC car laying committee reviews what we do and said, hey, does this belong here? And I think in an August meeting, we were saying, no, actually move it up, make it more general, because yeah, it was shoehorned in there because that seemed a logical place, given what else was around it, but actually
I called that out a couple of times when people spray painted the inside of the main panel.
yeah, and that cannot be remediated. Yeah.
Unless it can be removed with a dry white cloth.
Yes, so. Oh, I'll take brown, but yeah. Just so.
I've had somebody offer to clean it off with bar salt. And I said, yeah, go right ahead.
There are people who don't know any better. Yeah. There are electricians who don't know any better. Now, you don't have to open most of them, fortunately, because you don't have the time. I know that. I recognize that. But yeah, this is outdoors. Yeah. And well, the thing is sort of round. They had a cover that would fit, and it lasted for years, just like so. But what happened as it lasted? I took off the cover. And yeah, it had deteriorated, let's put it that way. One of the new rules is, the more specified rules is that when a receptacle no longer holds prongs well or doesn't make good contact, does not secure, it needs to be replaced. That's a simple write-up. Obvious. Well, here, in terms of, what's secured, this isn't secured to the front. So I guess it qualifies. In addition to specific, we've gotten more specific on the rules for covers, wall plates, and so forth. And I'll get to those. My friend Alan Naden, late friend Alan Naden, Chief Inspector Felcart, found this, cited it, of course, and all right. Somebody didn't know anybody. They thought, yeah, you cover these, and they didn't have a clue. This is also a violation. It's considered hazardous. Somebody wanted to put up a cabinet, or maybe a mirror, but probably a cabinet, and the cover plate was in the way. And so they modified the cover plate. They trimmed it so it no longer meets the listing requirement for completing the enclosure safely, keeping the sparks in, keeping the bugs out, whatever. And so, all right. Now, if you don't need a cabinet up there, or if you can trim the cabinet, you replace it with a wall plate. If you can't, that's going to be expensive because you need some kind of junction box, or you have to go into the wall and move the cables. So that's a minor thing to write up. No, it's a major expense if they're going to want that cabinet there. So I'm just offering suggestions as to the importance that might not be evident. You say, yeah, this is a violation. This is going to cost you. That's what you were talking about. They have to be suitable. They have to be intact. Right? They have to be secured properly. And unless a receptacle, switch, and indicator is marked for painting, we now have the rule saying, cited, it's contaminated. You don't know how it's going to be affected. Well, if an indicator light's been well painted, I know how it's going to be affected. Receptacle, I don't know. Switch may get away with it, may very well get away, may not. But that's what we decide. Keep it straightforward. All right. Any questions so far? Yeah, please.
There are receptacles that can be marked for paint.
I've never seen one. It just says, if you mark something as paintable, I'll tell you this, I had to buy a replacement for a wall timer recently, the type that you replace a switch with. And it came with 4 front pieces. You could snap off the front, which was white, and snap on an almond one or a dark almond one or a puce, whatever, I don't know what they were. That's the way that kit was sold. But I thought, should I contact manufacturers and say, does any of you have devices that are paintable? And didn't get around to it. My apologies, my abject apologies, moving along. Okay, intersystem interfaces. This is something that JD got me involved in a little bit. And it was critical. Sean, do you remember the story?
I think so.
You tell him?
No, Phyllis said, people can't hear him.
Okay. This medical person had a penthouse apartment, condo, and she called JD because water was pouring out of her electrical panel. And he tried to get hold of the county. They said, yeah. He called me. I went over, took photos, called the county. I'd been working with an inspector at the time and said, can you show me? I sent him photos. He had an inspector ready to go out there right then. And the condo management, which was responsible for the shitty, begging your pardon, roof work, that affected a bunch of the units, didn't want to let him in the electrical room. They did. He shut it off, and it was off for a while. So this is not electrical. And here, yes, we were able to get in and say, electrical problem. Another one, here. What are those wires? That's wiring. What's it doing here? It's running a fan, a duct fan. How well was that installed? Is there a risk of fire because they didn't know or care what they were doing? I see open splices like that, I get scared. Yeah, and I hope you are too. And looking a little further, I don't know whether I'm saying there are electrical wiring problems in this building or HVAC problems in this building. In this case, the probability is the HVAC installer did this wiring, didn't have that good a grip on the electrical code or electrical practices, and that's how it happened. Did they have a good grip on interface with the plumbing, with other parts of the electrical system? I don't know. I get nervous. That's the reason not only to cite this, but to say, what does this mean? And is there anything else that should get a good look? Because I found this. Now, you know when a motor is on its last leg sometimes. And we had to fight, or I had to fight, we had to dicker to get this new rule in. Because what's the appropriate wording? Well, if a motor doesn't spin freely, you hope its thermal overload will kick in, before it starts a fire, if it's correctly chosen and so forth. And even if it does, where's your customer? And where's the function that motor was supposed to be performing? Now, if I hear that motor and it's going, what kind of sound is it making?
Buzzing and grinding and all sorts of unhappy noises.
Yeah. We're saying, hey, cite this. Yeah. It seems like there's impending failure. Don't ignore that. Yeah. If you have a chance, you're not going to start every motor, obviously. But if you have a chance of that's something, and you see, oh, man, I smell the smell by this motor. That's not right. And you write it up, and you can say, and NFPA thinks that should be written up. There are some jurisdictions apparently that do adopt NFPA 73. I don't know how that affects home inspection, but I That's another piece of research I didn't get to.
We see a lot of,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, case in point, personal case in point, I had my front door broken into while we were on vacation, while we were actually at a conference, a safety conference, because the heat alarm that I had in my attic, not a smoke alarm, obviously, set off, and the fire, the police, the firemen will call, the police came in and broke in. They couldn't find it. They didn't realize we might have anything. And that was because the attic fan, the thermal protector cut out. Well, yeah, that's nasty, but just having it not working, you're deteriorating a bunch of stuff. You're not serving your purpose. And the homeowner is saying, hey, our cooling bill is a lot higher than it was in our old house. What is it? You told me it's the walls are all insulated, damn it. So I really like this one. I'm sorry to crow that. Presuming it's going in, I think we are keeping it. Now, this is the same thing as you saw before. Somebody who is in another trade, installed equipment, didn't know how. Exactly, knew how to get it working. It works, it's good enough, I get paid, I go. Now, you'd cite it. One thing, and I'm sort of jumping around here, one thing we did not include, because here's an interface and a dangerous one. A high proportion of fires, given that it's just one piece of equipment, home fires are the result of dryers that nobody ever cleaned the filter, or nobody ever cleaned the duct, or the duct got disconnected, or was the wrong kind of duct. And I really like the idea of our mentioning that, check to make sure that when the dryer goes, you see that flap on the outside of the wall is open. But, and Doug Lee of the Consumer Product Safety Commission sort of chimed in there too. But we decided that that is not electrical per se. So you guys get to call it, we don't. And yeah, open spices like that, geez, but look at here. And saddle clamp, yeah, and it's leaking a bit. And, it hasn't rotted anything away when I got there. This picture may be upside down, I'm not even sure. But there's BX, there's armored cable. Who here knows the difference between old style BX and modern BX?
Old style, the BX, the cladding could be used as the ground.
And the new style it can, but much more safely. The difference is that quite a few years ago, BX, which is the second experiment made in an armored cable, that's experiment B, X for experimental, but by Hank Greenfield, and I forget who his partner was, who'd been selling flexible conduit, just the spiral. That serves fine as a ground for DC. It doesn't serve as well as a ground for alternating current, because when you spiral some metal, you get a choke, you get impedance. So many years ago, we started adding a thin strip of, first it was copper, I think now it's aluminum, very thin strip that just does nothing more than bond from one twist to the next, to the next, to the next of that helix. All right. So you get that wet, that BX wet, and you have a thin, thin strip of aluminum. What do you have? It's good for stomach aches, right? Yeah. Except the alum normally is, oh, thank you. You are a saint and a glorious person. And going back to that fenestration issue, that house in Bethesda, I think it was, yeah, where I was asked to open every receptacle, every switch, and I think drop every light, because he wanted his parents to live there to the end as long as they could. In one room, I found there was a loss. I found correct polarization and grounding in most of the receptacles, but 3 of them, none. And what I found was there was a receptacle under a window that had been poorly installed. Moisture had gotten into the wall over the years and wetted the BX, and the armor had turned to dust. And so the rest of that circuit was ungrounded. So even if it isn't looking all rusty, I get concerned because it might not, BX that has gotten wet for a while could not trip the breaker or blow the fuse on AC as fast as it should. It'll do the job sort of, but there's a reason they added that strip. Yeah, it made a big difference because, and I'll give you an example. I had somebody, a colleague, saw a fire had started where BX was run up through a floor or down through a floor, you call it boats, anyway. And there had been a short, but it hadn't been quite enough to drip the breaker because that impedance, and the BX had heated up, the armor had heated because it was, you know, it was dissipating that energy. So I take that seriously, armored cable in what locations. I haven't run into the type of metal clad cable that does not have a separate grounding conductor in it enough to see. I don't know if I've run into it. I don't know if it has that same risk. I assume not. You'd see it's routed away or it isn't routed away.
The thing that surprises me is that armored cable in crawl spaces, that's not considered a wet location.
Can you repeat the question that people remotely can't hear?
Yeah. Woman said that she's surprised that armored cable is allowed in crawl spaces as long as they're not evidently wet, because they're not considered wet locations. Yeah. Now, you can't lay it on the floor, but yeah, the electrical code is very specific about wet, damp, dry. And you can run the sink, you know, a sink wand and spray it out the wall. And that's still considered dry location because that's not normally done. You know, you can have Romex on a construction job and it gets rained on and you haven't violated its listing because it was momentary. It dried up. But BX rusts away and there goes your ground. And the thing I love about BX is when it is correctly installed, you put a nail or screw through it, you are tripping your breaker because you've got your screw is contacting the ground before it contacts the energized conductor. Unless you've so offended the gods and goddesses, you know, that it's just gonna be a glowing connection. But that's an advantage over metal clad cable because metal clad cable is not listed as a grounding means, and it's tested to be a good enough ground within the area near where it makes its connections. Otherwise, you're relying on that grounding conductor, the green conductor, except for the new type with the thick aluminum conductor running through right under the armor. Other questions, concerns, comments? Okay.
Are you taking questions from the peanut gallery?
Now, same issue here. You see the rust on the staples. You can see from the wood that it's been dripping. Certainly a damp location you see on the plywood and back. Once it's done, I don't know. I get a little concerned. I'd be, if that were my place, I would check for continuity. I'd eyeball. And I would probably put, firstly, I'd say, what's going on? That water's coming from. Yeah. But aside from that, from an electrical point of view, I might say, maybe we should have a shield over this panel and over these cables. But that's not really electrical. The committee got together and said, no. Yeah. Now, you're going to talk about the moisture, yes. And
There's the difference between moisture and a source of moisture. And you're not supposed to have any plumbing above the panel.
yes, and that a lot of installations are grandfathered in that way. Yeah, so Bob Sisson said, hey, this is the difference between moisture. Hey, there was some moisture up there and that's none of your business. And a source of moisture. And you're not supposed to have any plumbing lines running above the panel. Maybe a sprinkler serving that area, okay, but aside from that, no. And that's true, but there are a lot of panels under plumbing lines that were installed way before that became the rule. As well as there are plumbers who just didn't know the electrical code and ran their lines afterwards. It is risky. And if I were a home inspector, I would mention it at the least. If there were any risk of leaking, if there were any joints in them, any valves, any taps, I would redouble. But NPA 73 says, not our affair. We weren't going to say, hey, you're looking at an existing dwelling, move those lines, or lower the structural ceiling, which is the other option. They can be above the ceiling. Yeah.
So what year did the rule come in about the no plumbing pipes above an electric panel? Repeat the question.
Yeah, the question was, what year did the rule come in about not having plumbing above the electrical panel? And the answer is, I have known, I don't have it at tip of my fingers, or tongue or toes, but if you want, I'll look it up, give me contact information, I'll email you. Or I'll just contact Hollis and say, here's the year, and you can post it for folks. That might be simplest. Send me an email afterwards, and yeah. All right. Oh, thank you. That's not my pen. There, got it. Plumbing over panel year. Okay.
Close to plumbing pipes be, what's the definition of above?
Yeah, directly above, I believe. They can be above the working space. And that's something I'm going to get to in a moment. Now, this is pre-existing. That may even be a type of Romex. That may even be a self-contained receptacle, or it could be just an extension cord with a tap. I don't know. What?
Sewer line that it's in it?
I believe what it is connected to is not a sewer line as of that, but a jack post that is permanently in place. But either way, it is not considered structure. Tape is certainly not considered securing it as designed. So we say, cite it, get rid of it, redo it. Pardon?
You're not allowed to fasten, if that's a gas pipe, you cannot fasten to a gas pipe.
The comment was that this, if it were a gas pipe, you couldn't fasten to it. As I said, I'm pretty sure it was a jack post.
Oh.
I mean, this was
Oh,
my
I beg
picture.
your pardon. Got it.
Yeah, I'll try to mumble louder.
The answer to how long has it been for plumbing above electrical panels is at least 50 years.
50, 50.
50.
Wow, that long.
Bob Sisson mentioned that it's been at least 50 years since the space above to the structural ceiling need to be clear of plumbing above the electrical panel. Not a receptacle, not a switch, not a little wall sconce. And it doesn't have to be the service panel either. All right. I've heard it called DC Freeway, Boston Freeway, various different names. I talk about it in, I think, both of my books, Electrical Wiring and Your Old Wiring. So there's a switch over there and you're putting in a new entrance to the room. And it's really good to have a switch there too. Well, how do you run power to it? Used to be, you could have 2 3-way switches. And, one could be up, one could be down, and it could mean the light is off because there's no power to it. Light is off because both the black and the white wires are energized, or the light is on because the black wire is energized and the white is returned, or the white is energized and the black is returned. It works. It was done for many years. It's been illegal for many years. And if you see it, you cite it because the light is off. You're unscrewing that light bulb, assuming people still use light bulbs. And as you're in contact with the base and with the shell of the lamp holder, you're prone to get zapped. Now, here's one I was, again, glad to get in. Use equipment in accordance with its listing. Basic rule from the NEC. We're adding or it's labeling or it's identification, because there are products that you must use a product identified for the use. Well, so you use it the way it's identified to be used, not for any other damn thing. Okay, here's an instantiation of it, which I thought, and the committee agreed, was quite important because it is so commonly violated. And only in some cases are you going to be able to catch that in your inspection. But if you do, and that's the one where this thing draws 12 amps and says, give it its own 15 amp circuit. Do not use it on a circuit with anything else. Dedicated circuit, individual branch circuit. And there wasn't one. So it was installed here and plugged into that circuit, or was given its own circuit and then something else was needed and this is a convenient outlet. Or it's a replacement of something that didn't have this restriction. It draws more power, or the manufacturer was more CYA, and now it has that ruling. And this is a piece of, you know, not somebody's portable heater. You're not going to be judging that most likely, but some fairly fixed equipment or permanent equipment. And it says that, and you go to the panel, And if they're really good, they've labeled it and said, circuit 23 serves that and these three other things. If it does say just it serves that, if you have the time to flip off circuit 23 and you notice the lights go off, you say, and usually you won't have time for that. But if the panel is labeled, that's the big one I hope to hell you citing. Because if the labeling is incomplete or unreliable, the first thing I tell any homeowner when I'm just called to do a consult, to look in a little more deeply the electrical system, is label your lines. I sold an article to the Washington Post many years ago detailing how, but you don't have to be an expert to learn how to do that. Just one breaker at a time, see what's off, move along. And yeah, go ahead, Bob.
The number one violation we see of this is garage door openers.
Bob just mentioned that, hey, somebody had a manual garage door, then they had an opener, and the opener wants an individual branch circuit, and they plug it in the light circuit, as he points out. So that's new. It matters because it's so hard to figure out, are people going to overload this circuit, that circuit, or the other circuit? And you can warn them about, ask people to read the wattage on equipment or use some sense about, but if something says, give me an individual branch circuit, and you see he hasn't gotten one, we're saying kindly, we have a new specification in the rule here. NFPA 73, section 5.3.3. Hey. Now, clear working space. I was asked to evaluate this electrical panel, which was not a safe electrical panel. And I said, this needs replacement. However, I am not going to work on it until you find another place for your washer and dryer. And that was the last I heard of them. Okay. But it is bloody dangerous to have an electrical panel where you don't have that, even if it isn't 30 inches by 3 feet and the full width of the panel clear and reasonable amount of working space. And I think that is a reasonable amount. Certainly the idea that doors can open, then open to 90 degrees and that the cover can be removed. This is pretty critical stuff that I hope, Dickens, you cite if panels are blocked. I've seen panels where they added a wall. Well, you saw the one in that bathroom, that early slide. And the other thing is we're now saying a rule that wasn't there until this next edition. It needs a path to it. You don't have to climb over stuff to get to it because why? Because if there's an emergency, you want to be able to get to those breakers without breaking your butt and find the right breaker, find that directory, flip it. And if it's an emergency and you haven't gotten around to labeling fully, you want to be able to find the panel, throw all the power off if you don't have a main disconnect outside. Because this is real safety stuff. And the bottom line is if the automatic means are not protecting you, you need to be able to turn things off by hand. Now, I'd hate to be in a rush and turn off a circuit on that fuse panel in my third slider. So, yeah, Bob.
Just a comment for our audience is that it is perfectly valid for a home inspector to refuse to open an electrical panel where there is a grounded device in our way.
Bob Sisson mentioned that is perfectly legit for a home inspector to refuse, for any bloody inspector, to refuse to open an electrical panel if there is a grounded device in the way. I would add even a device that should be grounded.
What
Yeah.
are the implications of a grounded device near
Yeah, excellent question. What's the implication of a ground device near the electrical panel? If I am working in the electrical panel and I shift a little bit, I stumble back, or I'm wedged against something, I don't want a path from the power through me to across my heart. Yeah, if my hand gets zapped, that's gonna be damn unpleasant. You know, I was taught originally, if you're gonna work in an open panel, stand to the side and keep one hand behind your back. Which is somewhat extreme. There are better ways to attain that safety. But certainly a path across me from the panel to, let's say I'm sitting on that or kneeling on that. If I'm sitting on that, I could, as it were, fry my ass. So I actually did look in that panel with fear and idiocy, but I wasn't going to do any work in it. Looking at it, they were nice people, and sometimes I do things I shouldn't for nice people. Okay, another little rule. You have smoke alarms, you have carbon monoxide alarms. We didn't say if they're not there where they should be, you must put them there. I hope you do. I do when I go in. But if they're there, that test button has to make that alarm. If it has a hush button, that probably should work too. I'd have to parse it carefully. If they're unconnected, you push one button, the other should alarm. If they're more than 10 years old, they got to go. Or whatever the design life was, if they're made in that brief period where the design life might have been shorter. And a new rule I got wedged in because I've seen so many jobs where there's plaster dust, there's muck and so forth. So I faked this picture with an alarm I'm trying to get rid of. If you got paint when covered part of the alarm and covered part of an opening, that's a sight. Because, I mean, like Bob Sis mentioned earlier, people overspray paint in electrical panels because they wouldn't mask and they wouldn't keep the covers on. And by the way, that rule about not painting receptacles, switches, or indicator lights, you have the cover on, you spray paint the circuit breakers. That's a sight. Just the handles, because I don't know where they're getting in, how they're going to affect the function. Probably not, probably fine. But I wouldn't want to put my insurance, my license on it. And in case anybody isn't real clear on it, even if the bus bar isn't sprayed, I don't care if you sprayed the cabinet, you want to move the load center and the breakers and spray the inside of the cabinet while masking around the labels, I'm not going to cite you, but I can't imagine anybody doing that. But the reason you don't want spray paint around a circuit breaker is because they are not sealed units. So, yes, the reason you do not want spray paint or spray any bloody thing around a circuit breaker is that circuit breakers are not sealed units. Aerosols can get in. And the reason they're not sealed units is because when they trip, that's heat in there, and there's going to be air inside them expanding. It needs to get out so they don't bulge. If you want to read any UL standard that is not harmonized with European standards, but any UL or UL Canadian, Mexican standard, you can do so for free and see what it says. You have to register at UL. You do not get to download it. You do not get to search through it. Well, you do if you volunteer on the panel. That's one benefit I get from volunteering on various panels. But you can look at the table of contents and you can scroll forward and see, oh, it doesn't test for that. Oh, and I'll give you an example. This hopefully goes in my next book. We'll see. If it sells. You make a splice. Use a wire. The UL standard says it needs to take, at least in the factory, in the testing, 35 pounds of force. I can't even do that with my fingers. So because I'm in my position with my insurance, I'm not shy about looking at splices and saying, is this a good splice? Because I've had so many splices come apart, so many splices overheat, so many splices where, why isn't this working? Oh, well, there was stranded wire was solid and the stranded wire got pushed back as they were twisting the thing on. So I find reading standards mind-numbing, eye-destroying, but sometimes valuable, and they are available to you. NFPA standards also are absolutely readable. Not only that, but if I remember right, you go to table of contents and you can pick a section to read. And what you do is you go to www.nfpa.org and I'll give you a list of standards, or nfpa.org/70 for the electrical code, 73 for the reinspection code right here. You get to read the 2021 edition, and it is available. NFPA 72, if you want to know about fire alarm and signaling systems. So where should smoke alarms be? Well, that's chapter 14 or 18 in NFPA 72. I have nothing memorized anymore, but it is available for you to look at. To say, just how bad is this? Yeah. And how screwy is this? And could this be legal? What it says is that there's a big change with regard to receptacles and GFCIs. Here's what I proposed. I said, hey, GFCIs, if a receptacle is out there and it's still in use and it requires a GFCI in that location, you have to replace it with a GFCI or give it GFCI protection. But if it's just there and it's working, you're allowed to keep using it. That's what killed a little girl in Texas some years ago, who was using her cell phone and plugged in her bathtub because it was legal to plug it in the charger and where the power supply and where she plugged it in is existing. But I said, hey, around swimming pools is the place that GFCIs were first required. That's been there forever. Let's at least say that if there's an outdoor receptacle near a swimming pool or indoor receptacle near a swimming pool, it has to be GFCI required. And the committee came back to me and said, no, wherever GFCI protection for receptacles is required, it should be required. This is life safety. It's just too dangerous. So he said, look, but not every jurisdiction has adopted the latest edition of the code with all the requirements. For instance, a basement is considered finished, run, finished. You want the receptacles GFCI protected. Maybe it just has unfinished receptacles. So I said, okay, require receptacles to have GFCI protection where the jurisdictions requires it of new new buildings or new building. Thank you. Yeah. Your health. Now, I would dearly like the rule to go further, and it may one of these days. I don't know how many of you know the story about why we got the requirement in the electrical code to protect outdoor outlets other than lighting outlets, provide GFCI protection, whatever kind of outlet they are, residential. But this is a story. There's a good man, an engineer, electrical engineer from Vancouver, I think, I'm not sure, from Canada, who represents IEEE on various panels. And he attended a seminar where he heard the story of two boys that were running home from school, cutting across 3 yards. And one of them looked back because his buddy wasn't with him. He was standing there touching the fence with his hand on that very air conditioning compressor. And was electrocuted. And he had brought it to the panel, and they said, okay, we're changing it. And later it was found that, yeah, these things vibrate and they're outdoors and things get loose. And if they stop working, they'll call somebody to repair them. But if they're still working, and it just happens to be the grounding that got loose, they may not notice. And somebody told me he did a survey for one of the breaker manufacturing companies, and they found it's not uncommon around the country. I said, can I see it? He said, no. So take that for what it's worth. But we've added that rule. However, here's a problem. GFCIs, and I sit on UL 943, GFCIs, are required to pass certain tests. And the tests are to make sure that they'll trip real fast on a real small amount of current at 50 or 60 hertz. More and more motorized equipment is leaking other kinds of current because they have solid state controls, because it's Energy Star, because it's much cheaper to leak that current to ground than to shield. And I talked with an EE designer who said they absolutely could, but they didn't necessarily. So what happened is we adopted this rule and people started losing their air conditioning in the summer, and old people needed it, and people started swapping the breakers back out. I know a son of a bit. I have a friend, a colleague, whose values differ from mine because he's taken my classes. He took a lot more classes than he needed for CE, but he would install pretty much anything outside and provide GFCI protection. And after he passed inspection, he'd swap it out for regular breaker to reduce service calls. I wish there were a few people with that attitude. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
There's something I'm not getting here. So, there's something I'm not getting here. What specifically are the conditions here that cause the death of this child?
Why, I was asked what were the conditions at that air conditioning compressor outside that caused the death of the child. One, there was grounded surface. It might have been the fence. It might have been the ground itself and wet sneakers. I don't know. Two, the wiring to the compressor shorted and energized the case, which he touched. And there wasn't a good enough ground to trip the 20 amp, 30 amp breaker. And that's why I said DFCI protection. My home, they have it. If I'm installing one, it's gonna have it. And we're working on it at UL 943. We're working on that issue of expand the requirements to specify you will not trip below a certain number of milliamps at higher frequencies, and you must trip at certain milliamps. And it's going to depend on frequency because it's a matter of the impedance of the skin, and the higher frequency is supposed to be safer. The only thing is that there is an international standard for non-ionizing radiation, which includes mention of contact current at high frequencies. That standard is endorsed by the World Health Organization. It is not a standard of what protected, but it has guidelines for it. So this is subtlety. And the problem is that the task group working on deciding the tests for us had been working a couple of years before this was brought to their attention. And so I don't know where it's going to go. But there is going to be some standard to allow protection against high frequency and protection against nuisance tripping at a high frequency. And so maybe we'll be able to more generally protect all outdoor equipment that could get energized. That's a hope. This is not in the standards. It's certainly something I will suggest to people when I do an inspection. Just like I will in old wiring. And okay, yeah, I'm the guy who wrote 2 books that there are out there on old wiring. I will tell people I recommend off-4 circuit interrupters because some of this stuff is deteriorated and uncertain. We can't look through it. And I say the AFCIs may trip. If they do, you get a choice to put in a regular breaker back or to say, yeah, let's look at the circuit and deal with it. But I have to tell them that there is that risk. I hope you do when you recommend GFCI, AFCI, or just right sizing the damn breaker if it's overfused. Okay. You would cite this, I'm sure, for a few reasons. You don't put a grounding conductor and a grounding conductor in the same terminal, but it's like that. This neutral bus is bonded to the can, and it's to say subpanel. Oops. Now, there is a new change in the electrical code, and it was proposed by a man who is a really committed to safety as a safety director for the Philly IBW local. But if there is a main panel and it's converted to a subpanel and it feeds an oven, a dryer, and feeds it through service entrance cable, SE, which combines the neutral and the ground, well, you have downstream grounding. Just like you have when you have a bootleg receptacle. And I know if you get an indication of that, you're going to cite it or say, have an electrician check it, or maybe even open and look and see, oh, they ran a wire from here to here. Oh, bleh. But now they're saying, look, under certain circumstances that are delineated, including that you isolate that neutral from the can, you're allowed to maintain that. That's a change. And if this is a little confusing, look at NFPA 73. The first draft is up and available now. You go to nfpa.org/73. You go to next edition, and then you go to first draft. You can read exactly what's been proposed for the text and the public inputs that got us there. And so you can read the 5 criteria, which I have not listened. But that's a change that is going to be valuable, because otherwise you're saying, oh, sorry, your panel is right by your front wall and your dryer is down there and the cable goes to the ceiling. Well, you're gonna have to replace that. And we've had to until now. Some of the changes. Wonderful change. Now I have a colleague who, the 3-generation electrical business, he is always putting meter mains out. Why? Because you have an outside disconnect. You can lock it if you want, because there are vandals around, or you choose your own term. But you need one so that power can be killed. But we're not requiring it at 73 because, good Lord, that's a major job. Yes, if you have to replace that service cable because it's deteriorated, and you all will call that one, or if you replace service equipment, or it's so undersized it's not going to show them. Yeah, in that case you do, but that's a service change. Then you're NEC, you don't have NP 73 involved. But if there are multiple sources of power, they want that bond out there. That's not an expensive thing to put up there, just so it's available. So that, you know, the phone system, the data, whatever, is tied into the grounding electrode. And also, generator, solar, all this stuff. Good. All right. We threw the emergency service disconnect. And we go in and we get zapped. No. You put a plot there saying what all the sources are. That's not expensive.
That's the one you and I wrote.
I'm sorry?
That's the one you and I wrote.
Did we? Thank you. Bob Sisson reminded me that he and I wrote that. All right. Incidentally, I don't think I've read it. I'm not sure he asked me, but I didn't remember. Douglas Hanson has written a book on electrical inspection of existing homes. I don't know if it complements my books. Mine are more on what possible systems there are and how to deal with them. Okay, here's something that's in advance. Shark bites, CPVC, PEX. You have this one little pinhole in your copper tubing, and you're not going to sweat a new piece of copper in there. You cut it out, you put in a little plastic. Well, until not that long ago, surprisingly recently, it was legal for somebody to replace a 2-wire receptacle with a 3-wire receptacle and run a ground to the nearest water pipe. Now, what happens if there's a little trickle current or fault, and it won't trip the breaker because it's going to plumbing and it hits that section of PVC? Or that shark bite. Shark bite is one brand that doesn't maintain continuity, and they say so. Other brands do. Some other brands do. Well, here's energized plumbing on top of some shorted equipment that somebody could touch and get zapped. Two ways to get harmed. So maybe you should bond around it where you don't replace the whole water system with plastic, but just put in something that interrupts the continuity. There are arguments in favor of it. I think we may well add that. I don't know. I won't know till August. You can call me or Doug Hanson or Tim Caton. Or in late February, the second edition will be posted. That will give us pretty much the gospel of what the new edition says. You know, comments closed. When this was originally planned, you would have had a chance to say, hey, you shouldn't be saying that, and you commented it's too late. But the NEC, the next edition, is opening up. And so that's available. And that's, oh, I'm done. I have one more thing. Again, I am available not just to refer business to me, but if you're wondering about questions as have been raised here, how long was this legal? When was it? I am happy to answer people's questions. Yes, Sean.
What do you think about this modern Bluetooth connectivity, like fixtures that you can talk to, all this stuff? Is this going to be under the NFPA documents and things like that? Or are we going to write codes about switches that use a sticker to attach to a wall?
So Sean Troxel was asking, hey, you have Alexis and Siri fighting each other to control your home or whatever. Is this part of the NEC? Well, we already have some provisions in that you are allowed to have sound activated, motion activated switches. If people want to add bells and whistles, years ago, I was offered light bulbs that could be controlled by your phone. Is that going to be anything? I don't think that's a big issue. There is a much more interesting system that's coming. And it's not coming residential anytime soon, though. And that is a power system that does a handshake. The equipment does a handshake with the source of power and controls it. That keeps you from overloading the wires, and it checks the faults. And it's coming in now, but I anticipate it'll go residential at some point here, down the road. And lastly, yeah, go ahead, Bowman.
So one of the questions I've always been curious about, and I just don't know the reason, if you have a receptacle on a piece of conduit outside,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be on two pieces of conduit. Why?
Oh. Firstly, Wellman said if you have a receptacle on a piece of conduit, and I'm sure she meant supported by a piece of conduit outside, it has to be supported by two pieces of conduit. Why is that? Well, I haven't looked at the original proposal. I can if you'd like me to. And I can give you a couple of pieces of logic, much less like 8-ton screw, right? Be held rigidly, even though you can have one in one end and one in the other end. Most commonly, it's two in the bottom. But either way, you're maintaining the continuity that way, and you're maintaining support. And just parenthetically, in case anybody takes informal discussion as law, it doesn't have to be supported by conduit. It can be a piece of conduit and a piece of unistrut, Kindorf, or whatever, piece of wood, whatever. Lastly, just to check any other questions.
I've got one. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Boy, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I saw something today that was kind of odd. it was some old rag wire Romex, old cloth Romex, and it was the conductors were copper, but the grounding conductor was aluminum. Is that a common thing?
I've seen grounding conductors that were steel or iron. I have not run across that aluminum ground that I can recall, the one you're mentioning.
This
But-
is circa 1960.
Wow.
That's like tin copper.
Could be. Bob Sisson suggested it might have been tin copper. Scrape it and.
It wasn't tinned copper. I scraped it with
Good.
my knife, and it looked like aluminum to me.
Yeah, then you're probably right, because you would know if you scraped it whether it were iron or aluminum. I don't
Well,
think you.
My question is, back then, I don't know if they had copper aluminum connectors and everything, and even
No.
it has no real load on it, hopefully, but is there any kind of concerns with that screwing into the copper screws of outlets and stuff?
Yes. Yes. Copeland devices, COPALUM or CO/ALR, have a rating for copper aluminum. They're the same metal, but they have cadmium plating that works better with the aluminum. I still don't like it. I still don't feel as safe with it. I would say, gee, folks, this stuff is old. There are not that many people who will do the crimp, the copolymer crimp. And that is the only really solid fix to pigtailing aluminum with copper. There are receptacles, there are wire nuts that are listed for it. They pass the test. I don't feel safe with them. Okay?
So you should I suggest that they have an electrician check all of their receptacles and light fixtures and everything, and make those ground wires compatible? I mean, that just seems like, because here's the thing, it's a 12-2 pitch attic full of insulation. There's no way you can even get in there. There's probably buried boxes up there. It would be impossible to do everything that you would need to do.
I understand, and there's always these trade-offs. What I'm saying is that if it were the power conductors, I could say put in AFCIs.
Yeah.
It's the ground, it can go bad and you won't know it, and we'll have to end with that.
Yeah, but it's not going to. I'm just wondering, how serious is it with grounding conductors?
How serious is it to have an unreliable ground?
Well,
The kid who died.
All right, well, Dave, thanks
Okay.
a whole lot. We sure appreciate you, all your expertise.